He pitted his 200-year-old dynastic rule against the Indian Union. He took a gamble that was doomed from start. Even as India readied herself for independence, the Nizam of Hyderabad, Mir Osman Ali Khan, chose to remain independent ruler of Hyderabad, the largest and richest princely state in the heart of India. 1 year later, one night in September 1948, his gamble came to naught. It was early hours on the morning of the 13th of September 1948 when the phone rang at the residence of Hyderabad's Prime Minister Mir Laik Ali. The shrill sound of the bell brought ominous news. On Hyderabad's border close to Sholapur, the first of the Indian forces had come through. As the day wore on, the forces moved in through more than 6 points around the border, while Hyderabad waited in uneasy silence. After months of futile negotiations, the Indian forces entered unopposed into the state of Hyderabad. Within days, the last princely state in India melted away into the past as Hyderabad became a part of India. September has always been a month of change in Hyderabad. It was in September nearly 200 years ago that the last Qutb Shahi Sultan fell to the might of the Mughal Empire. It was in September that he sat down to his meal in his magnificent fort of Golconda, knowing that his was the most secure fort in the Deccan. But little did he know that while the Mughal army stood without, the real enemy was within. As Emperor Aurangzeb's forces marched up to the fort, the gates were thrown open by the Sultan's own general, and treachery brought defeat to the Sultan's doorstep. For 200 years, the Qutb Shahi kings had built and ruled the kingdom of Golconda in southern India. Through the centuries, Golconda became famous for its diamonds, its efficient administration, and unique confluence of the Islamic and Telugu cultures. And as the Qutb Shahi star waned, Golconda was taken over by Asaf Jahi I, representative and governor of the Mughal emperor.
The first Nizam was an outstanding soldier, statesman and administrator. And although nominally he was a subordinate functionary to the Mughal emperor, the governor, the Subedar of the Deccan, but he behaved and conducted his affairs almost like an independent monarch.
Asaf Jahi's successors fought bitter wars of succession, allying themselves with either the British or the French. By 1799, the British gained significant powers. Mir Mehboob Ali Khan came to the throne in 1869. By then, the British controlled all aspects of the kingdom, from training the rulers to the appointment of state officials. Handsome and charismatic, Mehboob was definitely Hyderabad's most loved ruler. It was in 1763 that Hyderabad was moved from Golconda to around the Charminar, but it was during Mehboob's reign that Hyderabad began to evolve as we know it today. Here, in its bustling bazaars, Mehboob is said to have wandered the streets dressed as a commoner. It was August 29, 1911. The mood at Falaknuma Palace was somber. Mehboob had collapsed and lay dying. His 25-year-old heir, Mir Osman Ali Khan, was brought to his bedside, and as Mehboob looked into his son's eyes, he died. Within days, with much pomp and splendor, Mir Osman Ali Khan became the 7th Nizam. little knowing that he would, in fact, also be the last. Mir Osman Ali Khan spent most of his life isolated here at Osman Cottage, where his granddaughter, Princess Rashidunisa Begum, now lives. Here he was rigorously trained by a British tutor, Brian Edgerton and Syed Hassan Bilgrami. Apart from his training in administration, the young prince was also reared in the strictest traditions of the Mughal court. For the Nizam was considered the head of the last Mughal court in India, a medieval monarchy resting on a landowning feudal nobility.
It was a successor to the Mughal viceroyalty of the Deccan, and it followed the Mughal customs, the Mughal traditions to a large extent. Somewhat modified by the Dakkani traditions, and the Nizam was the center of the court. Everything revolved around him. Hierarchy was very rigid. People did not have access to the ruling class except through being servants of the court, and it was very difficult to get into court circles. So naturally the society was very hierarchical, and the whole society of Hyderabad was like that. Everything was determined by the relationship to the court.
At the apex of Hyderabad's hierarchy of nobles were the Paigars. Known as Shams-ul-Umra, they were commissioned to maintain troops for the Nizams, and in return were given vast jagirs or lands. Related by blood and marriage to the Nizams, they were masters of the most magnificent palaces, from which they administered their fiefdoms as complete kingdoms in themselves.
पुलिस हमारी, कोर्ट हमारा, बिल्कुल या हमसे कंसर्न.
These aristocrats like Paigars, along with other premier families of the Nizam's court, like that of Maharaja Kishan Parshad and the Salarjangs, owned nearly a third of the land in the kingdom. They were also the torch-bearers of the Mughalai court's traditions and culture. They set the trends and became the yardstick for good taste. From fashion to etiquette, they inspired imitation from all levels of society. Their reputation for lavish lifestyles and generous hospitality drew many a distinguished visitor to Hyderabad.
बसंत का त्यौहार तो आपको मालूम है, बहुत ही मशहूर सारे हिंदुस्तान में मनाया जाता है. और तो इनका ये था सर आसमान जागा कि अपने हिंदू दोस्तों के लिए वो ख़ास तौर पे अरेंज करते थे. तो उसकी खुसूसियत ये थी कि जो फर्श होता था वो भी पीले रंग का, क्रॉकरी कटलरी पूरी पीली, और लेडीज़ यूजुअली इन येलो.
Although a smart young man quite comfortable with the Western lifestyle, Osman Ali Khan was very aware of the fact that his was a court of Mughal descent. His court was ruled by a strict etiquette which ranged from respecting hierarchy and seniority to following a strict dress code.
Everything was very strictly observed. There was a dastar, a peaked turban and a belt called the baklus and a sword. All these were compulsory for court etiquette.
Unlike the previous Nizams, Osman Ali Khan showed keen interest in administration, especially during a short period of 7 years from 1914 to 1919, when he did not have a prime minister. He improved agriculture, instituted public works and modern systems of transport and communication, and began a tentative process of industrialization. He founded Osmania University to improve higher education. Perhaps his greatest achievement was the revamping of the exchequer, which had become bankrupt during the time of his father. But this period of his administration also reveals that he clearly resented control or opposition.
Osman Ali Khan, by nature, by upbringing, by training, by temperament and by preference, he was a power wielder. He was comfortable only when he was himself leading from the front and doing things himself. That way, the kind of delegation of powers which we have today was unheard of in any princely state.
This independence brought him first in conflict with the British. During the reign of the Asaf Jahis, for the man in the street, the sovereign power lay in the hands of the Nizam, and all authority emanated from his great palaces like the Cha Mohalla, King Koti or Falaknuma. The reality was, however, quite different. By the turn of the century, like most princely states, the real power came from the British residency a few miles away from the palaces. Since the mutiny, the British had allowed the princely kingdoms to exist independently, but used every opportunity to reinforce the paramountcy of the British over the prince. The crown had direct control through the political department represented by a resident. The Nizam tended to flout British paramountcy. Strong personality, he was also brought up to believe that he was a keeper of the Mughal tradition.
He was brought up in a very princely, courtly atmosphere where too much was made of him. He was made into a sort of demigod, and he in course of time began to think of himself as one.
The British were quick to suppress such pretensions. In the 1930s, they insisted that the Nizam be assisted by an executive council whose members were appointed by the resident. Sharing power with the British was a necessary evil, but nothing had prepared him to share power with his people. For Hyderabad had failed to realize that the world outside was changing rapidly. The world over, monarchies were being swept away by democracies. In India, this ideology lit the flames of the independence movement. And the freedom movement had its echoes here in the lanes and bylanes of Hyderabad.
Surely no part of India could remain unaffected by it. We read books and pamphlets issued by different political groups and parties. Then for my generation it is, I suppose, very natural that we attended a lot of meetings addressed by different kinds of personalities. So out of curiosity to know and learn what is going on around me, I would go and attend most of these meetings.
Inspired by the leaders of the freedom movement who visited Hyderabad and by their works, there was a growing awareness of liberal ideas, of concepts like equality, political rights, civil liberties, and democracy completely at odds with the traditional feudal values of Hyderabad State. Here in the streets of Hyderabad, the new political awareness fueled a series of public movements aimed to secure civil and political rights for the common man. One of the earliest parties to be founded was the Congress, and their demand was merely a responsible government.
हैदराबाद स्टेट कांग्रेस यहाँ पर ये चाहती थी कि निजाम ही की सरपरस्ती में एक जिम्मेदाराना हुकूमत कायम की जाए.
There was another, more radical point of view.
Congress confined it to civil liberties and responsible government under the Nizam. But we were not for it. We were going beyond it.
In the 1920s, Hyderabad was a feudal monarchy, a society tilted in favor of the elite. This was reflected in the land distribution in the state. Nearly a fourth of the land in the kingdom was owned by the Nizam's personal estate, the Sarf-e-Khas, and his nobility. This land, owned by around 1,000 people, was tilled by nearly 4 million tenant farmers. Although they farmed the land, they had no right to the produce and existed at the mercy of the landowner. The farmer in this system was economically and socially oppressed.
Zamindari oppression, Jagirdari oppression, these were, and above all, protecting them all is the Nizam's police and all. So therefore, this was a very, very terrible scene in Telangana villages, and it created a lot of agony.
जुल्म ये कि उनको मरवा डालने में मुझे कोई तुक नहीं था, कोई उनको आर या झिझक नहीं रहती थी कि किसी को मरवा डालें. पंथिया मजदूर थे और जो किसान थे उनकी बेहद बुरी हालत थी.
In the 1940s, the communists would initiate a movement against this exploitative system, which would in due course change the face of Hyderabad. The communists worked to raise political awareness amongst different groups, including industrial labor and students. They also attracted a large number of intellectuals, artists and writers like Makhdoom Mohiuddin. But their most successful move was to organize thousands of peasants all over the state against the Jagirdars. In their war for rights, they also protested against the domination of the court culture and language over the local language Marathi, Kannada and Telugu.
The cultural oppression means Telugu language was not the medium of instruction even in primary, Marathi, Kannada also. And Telugu papers were not there, Telugu libraries were not there, Telugu. After all, that way, suppression of Telugu.
My generation learned Urdu. I am a great lover of Urdu. I speak, write, read Urdu. But then what they did was also a projection of Urdu as a superior language to the others. This led to animosity.
The third important offshoot of the freedom movement was the growth of the Arya Samaj as an important political force. The Arya Samaj began to protest the lack of civil and religious liberties and would soon take on the role of spearheading the national movement in Hyderabad. In response to this popular uprising, the Nizam was forced to institute a legislative assembly. However, having been brought up to take his monarchy for granted, he never really came to terms with democracy. He was quick to suppress political activity by banning the Congress and imposing rules like the Grasti Nishan Tirpan, which severely limited political activity in the state.
We had a library association. That library association was a precursor to Andhra Mahasabha, where cultural movement was there. Books, libraries, setting up of libraries, people like Madhupati, Hanmantara, etc. were there. Now, this library association was not allowed to hold its conference in Khammam. Khammam was part of Warangal district in those days. Later on, they allowed it, which was to be presided over by B. Ramakrishna Rao. You know under what conditions? 1,000 rupees security was demanded and collected. And the condition was that if any political speech is made, these 1,000 rupees will be confiscated. Now this is about a library conference.
Hyderabad of the 1930s was a seething mass of conflicting ideologies with 87% Hindu population and 13% Muslim. The culture and character of the society was molded by the traditional Mughal court. Spurred by the freedom movement, the majority resented the imposition of this culture. This growing resentment sparked off a sharp defensive reaction from the Muslims of Hyderabad. Founded by Bahadur Yar Jung, the Majlis-e-Ittihad al-Muslimin was originally a Muslim social organization which soon became the political voice of the Muslims. Much impressed by Bahadur Yar Jung, the Nizam supported it until it began to encroach upon his authority and position.
मजलिस-ए-इत्तेहाद अल-मुस्लिमीन इस बात का बबांगे दोहल ऐलान करती थी कि हम बादशाह के वफादार हैं। फिर मजलिस-ए-इत्तेहाद अल-मुस्लिमीन के प्लेटफॉर्म से यह सदाएं बुलंद होने लगी कि हम बादशाह हैं। हम बादशाह हैं का मतलब यह था कि हैदराबाद के रहने वाले सारे मुसलमान बादशाह हैं, और उसका असर आसिफ सावे पर यह पड़ा कि इत्तेहाद अल-मुस्लिमीन के रूह रवां कायद मिल्लत नवाब बहादुर यार जंग की जो जागीर थी वो जागीर जब्त कर ली गई। उनका जो खिताब था वो खिताब छीन लिया गया, इसलिए कि वो इस बात को बर्दाश्त करने के लिए तैयार नहीं थे कि बादशाही का तस्वुर उनकी कोठरी से निकलकर एक आम मुसलमान तक पहुंचे।
In the 1940s, it would play a crucial role under its new leader, Qasim Rizvi. Although political activity was bringing a new excitement in the air, Hyderabad in the 1940s continued to keep its characteristic leisurely air.
हैदराबाद बिल्कुल देहात जैसा था। मशीनों के जो धुएं हैं, गाड़ियों के धुएं हैं, ये सब देखने नहीं मिलता था। मुझे जहाँ तक याद है कि हैदराबाद में अफजलगंज तक कोई पेट्रोल पंप नहीं था फलकनुमा से। लोगों के पास एक्के थे, एक के पास घोड़ा था, और घोड़े को मेंटेन करना भी उतना ही होता है जितना रोलेस राइस को मेंटेन करना होता है। सनानी दरवाजे अलग होते थे। अभी भी हमारे पुराने शहर के घर में यही है, जो गली का दरवाजा होता था वो सिर्फ खवातीन के इस्तेमाल का होता था। जो सड़क का दरवाजा होता था उससे मर्द अंदर आते थे। औरतों से ज्यादा मर्द पर्दा करते थे। वो खुद ये सोचते थे कि भी उस तरफ खवातीन है तो हमारी हिफाजत हम कर लेना चाहिए। हैदराबादी का मिजाज जो है ना, वो बड़ा समझिए लेथार्जिक या काहल मिजाज के आदमी। वो कोई गड़बड़ करना नहीं चाहते, अपना बैठे सुकून से, कुछ हो जाए तो भुगत ले, ना हो तो बस मुस्कुराए।
However, under its calm exterior were smoldering embers of discontent that would burst into conflict. It was 1946. India, on the eve of her independence, was confronted by a monumental task. That is to integrate 550 princely kingdoms scattered across a third of its territory. The princely states of India had always been under the direct jurisdiction of the crown. Persuaded by India's statesmen, most states agreed to join the Indian Union after independence. Hyderabad, as one of the largest and richest princely kingdoms in India, was of particular importance. Opinion in Hyderabad itself was sharply divided. The supporters of the freedom struggle were of a generation that saw Hyderabad as part of India. They included a majority of the Hindu community whose cultural ties with India went beyond Asaf Jahi rule in the Deccan.
Hyderabad was in the heart of India. That historically, culturally, geographically, there's no chance for an independent Hyderabad.
There was, however, another point of view.
हैदराबाद में जो सुकून, अमन, हिंदू मुस्लिम इत्तेहाद, भाईचारगी थी, वो कहीं और नजर नहीं आती।
This group of people had for 200 years accepted that theirs was a kingdom ruled by their own ruler. This group also included a section of the Muslim community who had been a part of the ruling culture. By 1947, as reports of partition and tales of carnage came pouring in, there was a tremendous sense of insecurity about the future of Muslims in India.
पार्टीशन के बाद में जो है इधर से भी कत्ल हुए, उधर से भी कत्ल हुए, तो ये तो जाहिर है ये सारे इत्तलात और न्यूज़ के जरिए तो लोग बाइल्म रहते ही हैं।
Qasim Rizvi represented these people. He was a fiery orator, and what he had to say struck a chord amongst the people who wanted to safeguard the only world they knew. Ostensibly to protect Hyderabad, he founded a paramilitary force called Razakars. The Razakars would be instrumental in eventually ending the very world they tried to preserve. The Nizam had shown himself intolerant of any curbs on his power by the British. Now he saw an opportunity to be completely independent of any authority. and in June 1947 he made his first move by declaring his intention to remain independent of both India and Pakistan. On August 15, 1947, as the country jubilantly celebrated the dawn of independence, Hyderabad stayed aloof.
When the rest of India was celebrating the achievement of independence, Hyderabad was very tense. On the 15th of August 1947, the government of Hyderabad banned the hoisting of tricolor flag. It was banned. Hoisting of the tricolor flag was considered anti-national, anti-Nizam, etc. But I was one of those group of young men who hoisted the tricolor flag on the office of the All Hyderabad Students' Union on the 15th of August 1947. It was hoisted by one of our leaders, Joint Secretary Rafi Ahmed. The police had cordoned off the entire area, but somehow through the lanes and by-lanes we managed to get on top of the building and then hoisted the flag. I mean, that gives you a picture. I mean, the sort of situation that prevailed at that time.
In August 1947, the Indian government was as yet too new to beat the Nizam at his own game. Since June of that year, the government of India had been negotiating to no effect with a delegation led by Nawab of Chattari and Sir Walter Monckton. On October 22, 1947, the government of India offered a standstill agreement which was brought to the Nizam's government. The delegation arrived at King Koti and met with the Nizam. The Nizam agreed to sign the document the next morning, which the delegation would take to Delhi. That night at 3 a.m., thousands of Majlis supporters surrounded the houses where the delegation slept. Virtually prisoners in their own homes, the members were not allowed to leave for Delhi.